Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zolotech, and iOS 17.4 has been out for almost a couple weeks at this point. iOS 17.4 has even more to talk about since the iOS 17.4 is out what's new video, and we'll talk about the overall experience, as I've been using it full time on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and the experience seems to have changed for some. We'll also talk about your experience based off the YouTube community poll, where there's over 23,000 votes and an incredible 501 comments. It took me some time, but I've gone through every single comment to determine what the overall experience is like for most people. Now, true sideloading is actually coming to iOS 17.4 or maybe 17.5. We'll talk about that in a moment, but there's first a few things I wanted to mention as far as iOS updates and much more. Code found in the latest updates by Mac Rumors seems to indicate that Apple Vision Pro will start launching in new countries soon, possibly 9 different countries such as Australia, Canada, China, France, Germany, Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and the UK, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. All of those could be launching very soon, maybe before WWDC. Also, Epic Games is at it again, accusing Apple of charging fees when Apple should offer in-app links to allow for different purchase options. This is based on what they think is the interpretation of the court ruling in the EU, and so it seems that even though Apple brought back their developer account, they're still at odds, so there's still some issues to be worked out. Now, Apple Watch lost the ability to measure pulse oximetry in the United States if you bought it after a certain time frame, typically around January, and if you did buy an Apple Watch after that, you just won't have the option. However, it can be re-enabled with a software update in 2028 if Apple appeals and succeeds. So based off of that, if they do succeed, they could enable it again. However, they could just go in a different direction by then, maybe use different technology or different sensors altogether. Apple has also been concerned about the security risks posed by the EU forcing Apple to change or allow apps outside the App Store. iCulture had an exclusive interview with Apple about this with Gary Davis, who is concerned about security on iOS and the changes making it easier for exploits to be implemented on iOS in general. So we'll have to see where this goes. I don't think we'll see a change. If anything, we'll see more sort of openness of iOS and different platforms in the future. Now, as far as new features in iOS 17.4, well, we know all of the major features, such as new emoji, podcast transcriptions, which I absolutely love that it has that included, where you can just jump around, search for what you're looking for. It also has sideloading for the EU or third-party app stores, default browsers, and many more changes, over 45 different changes. However, there's a new splash screen some are seeing for Apple Music with Apple Music Discovery. So if you go into the home screen, give it a second here. With Apple Music Music Discovery, some people are seeing a dedicated splash screen for that. And also, I'm seeing a new splash screen in Messages for the first time. And the first time I open Messages on this device, there's a new splash screen saying get updates in Messages. Get updates you request from trusted businesses, opt out anytime, and chat with businesses directly. That's something we had new in this update, so we can allow that in Messages as well, but we're seeing that new splash screen. Let me know if you've seen any others that popped up that we haven't mentioned before. Now, iOS 18 is said to feature an updated Freeform app with Freeform scenes. So I haven't used Freeform in a very long time, but it should have updated scenes, and what that means is basically it will help users navigate different sections. It's sort of hard to figure out maybe where you are, maybe if you place a different object, you could hide the grid, show the grid, or maybe add text or something else. It can be difficult to locate where you're at, and these scenes apparently will help this. Also, Mark Gurman reports that we could have a hearing aid mode on iPhone with iOS 18 and AirPods Pro 2. That would be great, bringing new accessibility features along with that, and Apple also recently bought Darwin AI to sort of bring new generative AI features with iOS 18. So they keep sort of buying AI companies to implement new features. There's also expected to be a big update with UI redesigns and more. Maybe some new app redesigns, hopefully a new control center, maybe some new options for things we weren't expecting. And RCS messaging, of course, is also something Apple's already announced, but we're still waiting for. Apple's also sending a new vendor UI version of iOS 18 out to factories to verify information. So that's something they typically send out to verify once they install it on devices, but that won't really be anything that we'll see probably until Apple shows it in June. So those are just for factories to sort of verify the update, but they are sending that out. Now, as far as WWDC invites, well, that could be in just a couple weeks. Last year, Apple typically announces this in late March, and they announced on March 29th that it would be held in June. However, it could be any day, as Apple has announced it as early as February 16th in 2017, and you can see that typically in the developer app and other places as well once they start announcing that with WWDC. So you can see the 23 highlights here from last year. We'll see this updated with more information as well. And true sideloading is something we're finally going to get in the EU, meaning that you can install apps outside of an app store. This is something Apple announced in the developer app, as you can see here, where there's more flexibility, and it says distributing directly from your website. So you'll have this available with a software update later this spring, maybe iOS 17.5, where Apple will allow different apps to be installed directly from a website similar to Mac. This could be a concern for security, as I mentioned before, but it is something that we can expect in the EU. I wish Apple would bring some of these features, or at least an option to enable this in other places such as the United States, or at least try it out, but it looks like it's something that's going to be coming very soon in the spring. Also, Apple stopped signing iOS 17.3.1, meaning you can no longer downgrade to it. This makes sense, as we know Apple's actually working on iOS 17.4.1. Mac Rumors found it in their analytics and others as well, and it seems we could get that update very soon. As far as when we could get it, well, maybe next week at this point. Based on what we're seeing, we didn't have any major update this week, and maybe Apple's delaying the beta updates to bring them more in line with the releases scheduled last year. What that means is last year we had iOS 16.4, so if we go back here to 2023 and we go back to March, we actually had iOS 16.4 on March 27th. Then on March 28th, we had iOS 16.5 Beta 1. Maybe Apple's waiting until later in the month of this year to maybe implement those changes, so it could be another week or two until we see that beta update, if that's what they're doing. However, we could see iOS 17.4.1 on Monday or Tuesday this coming week. We just don't know, as Apple hasn't said specifically. Now, iPads, we're still waiting for them to be refreshed as well, and Mark Gurman is now saying that they should be toward the end of the month. So new iPads Pro, iPad Air, and other things. So an iPad Pro with an OLED display, a new Apple Pencil, a new Magic Keyboard, and possibly a new thinner overall bezel, thinner chassis of the frame here, and that's a little bit concerning, as this actually breaks pretty easily. It flexes, and you don't really want to do that regularly, but maybe it will be titanium or something else to sort of get rid of weight but add rigidity and strength. So we'll have to wait and see, but it looks like probably toward the end of the month we'll get this, and if that's when iOS 17.4.1 launches or 17.5 Beta 1, that may make sense. Now, Apple seems to have removed a few features, and we'll probably see this with iOS 17.5. Hopefully they bring some of these back. I've mentioned this before, but there was mentions of a Home OS overall that would be a new OS. Maybe they'll bring with HomePod and maybe an iPad integrated together, as many have rumored. Also, we had a widget that actually changed color with the background sort of podcast playing to match, just like music does. We also had Safari navigation bar that was a little bit different, so it was a little bit wider instead of being narrow. Additionally, we had a stopwatch live activity I've talked about. It was only in a couple betas, and then they removed it. So we'd tap start, slide home. I would love to see many more live activities and things go into the dynamic island. Maybe they're just holding on to that for iOS 18. Also, of course, Apple pulled a feature early on with SharePlay that would work with HomePod and Apple TV as well. They removed that from early betas of iOS 17.4, and I would love to see them bring that back. However, there is good news with Wi-Fi bugs being fixed in this update, and there's other bugs to talk about in a moment, but we had that Wi-Fi bug that was fixed. Also, Remind Me in Mail was working again, I mentioned last week, and of course, the notification bug is fixed. Hopefully I won't have to notice or mention that anymore, but once we've moved on to iOS 17.5 and it still works, I just won't mention it again. Now, Apple updated its security release website, and they added GarageBand. GarageBand 10.4.11 was updated. I mentioned this in my app update video the other day, and of course we have the other updates for all of the different releases over the past week or two. So iOS 17.4 and iPadOS 17.4 have a ton of security updates, and this is one of the main reasons I said it was important to update despite maybe some other issues. So lots of things that were fixed, definitely important, and again, if you want to review these, I'll link them in the description. Now, there is a new list of bugs I've made from all of your different comments and things and other people that have had issues that have talked to me personally with iOS 17.4. It seems that sooner than we thought, bugs were sort of cropping up, and there's a couple things worth mentioning. So there are other bugs that I've talked about before. I'll just put in a little screenshot here. So lots of things that have happened with squared notifications and others. But as far as new bugs, well, time in the dynamic island, as far as the alarms showing up, are not showing for some people. So maybe you went to an alarm or a timer, hit start, it doesn't show up and didn't show the information properly. Some people are actually having that issue. Other people are having issues with a touch bug. That actually happened to me specifically. I was trying to open an app, specifically Twitter or X, go into the direct messages, tap on it. It didn't do anything. So I tapped over and over. I had to lock my display, unlock it, and then touch input worked again. Also, my wife's alarm didn't go off, and I've heard this from a couple other people. You had an alarm set, it didn't wake you up. She had volume turned up, it didn't sort of do anything. It sort of just recognized that there was an alarm, but never made any noise, and that's obviously a big concern. In fact, my daughter came in and woke her up at the same time because her alarm worked, but my wife's didn't. Many people are now reporting slowdowns and stuttering. However, a reboot seems to fix that. And also, my wife noticed a major decrease in battery life. Now, I haven't really seen one myself. We'll talk about that in a moment with many other people. But she actually asked me what's going on with this update, and she never says anything. So that's definitely a concern if it's coming from her. Also, some people still have issues with AirPods connectivity, rebooting overnight, which is something they fixed a long time ago, false Siri activations and display activations, also focus modes staying active or turning on randomly or not turning off, and duplicate photo bugs when you're actually using WhatsApp and saving a photo. So I don't have that issue personally, but many people are reporting that as well. So lots of bugs in this update, including the wallpaper dimming bug. It's still there. You can see it desaturate, typically toward the top. It's just something that's there that they haven't fixed. As far as the camera, well, most people are having no issues with the camera this time around. However, some are reporting that if they try and open the camera from the lock screen, sometimes it just goes to a black display. Other times it works properly, and sometimes if you take a photo, it goes to a black display. Again, I haven't had that issue. It seems to be working fine for me, but many are still having issues with it. Let me know what you think of the photos, though. They seem to be pretty good. I don't think they're going to improve the quality or HDR or anything like that, but here's a few different ones, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, as far as overall performance, well, the good news is very few people report issues with performance other than the stuttering I mentioned before. Typically, a reboot fixes that, and most people say there's not an issue with performance and it's super smooth. Whether that's ProMotion on one of the 120 Hertz ProMotion displays, or just using a regular iPhone 11 without any issues, everything seems to be loading fast. If we go into music, we go to browse. Again, this is dependent somewhat on your Wi-Fi connection too, but it seems to load as you would expect. That's great news. However, many say it's running too hot. So I personally haven't had it run really hot, and it was a little bit warmer for me, at least for a few days, but thankfully I haven't had too many issues. It will get warm as it's processing data, but it is warmer than normal. So let's take a look at the thermal camera. Now with 17.4 that I've been using, you'll see sitting here just holding the phone, we're at about 89 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. On the one that was sitting idle, it's a little bit warm, but not terribly warm, at about 83 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, on 17.4 that I've been using, 32 degrees Celsius about, and then on the one that was sitting idle, we're at about 28 degrees Celsius. So definitely a little cooler. On the other one that we haven't been using, of course, it makes sense. We're not using it right now. But in general, it is a little bit warmer than I would expect. Not terrible, but warmer than expected. Now, as far as Geekbench scores, I did run those. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. And if we go into Geekbench 6, give it a second to load here, and go into CPU benchmark. I ran this just before the video and had 2,937 for single core, 7,168 for multi-core. I've seen higher scores before with multi-core, but this was after doing nothing, just letting it sit idle. So it's going up and down, but most people are reporting that it's a pretty smooth experience. But I just share those that if they're way off, it doesn't make sense, then it's a problem. If it's a few hundred off, it's not much of an issue. As far as overall battery life and battery health, well, this is my main phone, as I've mentioned before, that I've been using since day one. And if we go into battery health, I have 100% with 132 cycles. You can see coconut battery here. It looks like it'll probably drop to 99% soon, but this is doing pretty well overall. As far as battery life itself, well, my battery life has been okay, not phenomenal. but it's been getting me through most of the day. But last night it was at about 20% when I went to bed. So you'll see I had 2 hours and 44 minutes of screen active time, 2 hours and 30 minutes of screen idle time, and used about 75% of my battery. The day after, similar usage, 2 hours and 46 minutes of screen active time. Today, so far, I'm down to 74%, and it's used 1 hour and 49 minutes. So it's doing much better today, but that's the number one concern that many people have. And we'll see that in the comments in a moment. Last week, 64% said that battery was good or better than the previous version, or the same or better. 36% said it was worse. This week, though, it seems to have gotten much worse for most people. What's using it, we don't really know, and it seems to be an issue for a lot of people. So definitely some odd things going on here. We'll take a look at some of your comments in a moment, but it seems to be worse now instead of better. Now, if you're wondering if you should install iOS 17.4, well, I'll still recommend it due to the security updates that I mentioned before, and that's something that I would highly recommend just based off the security updates alone. However, if you're worried about battery, well, and you're not really online much, well, then you may want to hold off until iOS 17.4.1. Also, just to check this really quickly, many people have been asking me about storage, and iPhone storage, when you install an update, will overwrite the older update, but it could take a few days for everything to sort of level out, and you'll see iCloud has sort of disappeared from up here in the iPhone storage. So that's something that's a little bit new, at least some people have been reporting. And if we scroll to the bottom, you'll see iOS 17.4 is using 11.65 gigabytes, and I have 9.97 gigabytes of system data used. That can vary greatly. It can go 20 to 30 gigabytes and come back down as it will use it as needed. But in general, it seems to be pretty normal for most people for it to sort of stabilize, and it looks like Apple's fixing this for most. Now, as far as the comments and what you had to say, let's take a look at some of those. Kent Wingard 8803, hopefully I'm saying that properly, on iPhone 15 Pro Max, and battery life has improved significantly with this release. This is as good as iOS 17.2 was for me. I don't have any issues with this release, but I'm afraid the same thing will happen to me with 17.2.1. The battery life was excellent on 17.2, but then 17.2.1 was terrible, so I hope iOS 17.4.1 won't change battery life. Then we have a very stark contrast here with Alex Nicolay 1, who says, worst battery life ever. I have a 13 Pro with 89% battery health. The standby time is great, like 4 to 5% per night, but when using the phone, percentage drops like crazy. I don't game, I just scroll social, X, Instagram, and use WhatsApp most of my time. I get 40 minutes screen on time for 10% battery usage, and that happens when the battery is above 50% left. When it's below 50%, it drops even quicker, and this is on Wi-Fi only. If I start to use 4G or 5G, it's way worse. TIP Mitra 06 says battery life has been phenomenal, easily 2 days on minimal usage on 13, although it's still at 100% battery health. Will Newcomb says 17.4 on my iPhone 12 Pro Max is finally given battery life despite its health being 76%, about 7.5 hours. After a few days, I had to reset network settings as Wi-Fi stopped working. RDWM3FO says, my 10S is buttery smooth after the update, but the battery life has been terrible. Maybe it's just the age of the device, but haven't experienced any abnormal heating. Noah Messer 5023 said, iOS 17.4 on my 15 Pro Max, and it's been really good. The only odd bug I have is my iPhone randomly rebooted overnight while plugged in while I was sleeping. I woke up and it required me to put in my passcode. Other than that, it's been good for me. My wife has a 13 Pro Max and she's running iOS 17.4 and her phone has been rebooting quite frequently. Not sure what's going on. Hopefully Apple will fix this bug very soon. Hopefully we get iOS 17.5 Beta 1 very soon. I'm surprised we don't have it already. SZ Lawai says, hopefully I'm saying that properly, since I updated my iPhone 15 Pro to 17.4, the phone restarts by itself multiple times per day. Sometimes within a phone call, when I watch a movie, or when switching between apps. No idea what is exactly wrong, but it makes the phone useless for me since I need it for work. Never had such a bad experience with Apple. So that's everything so far with iOS 17.4. It's been a very different experience depending on who's using the phone, what apps they're using, what settings they have, and much more. Hopefully Apple really fixes this with iOS 17.4.1, and iOS 18 is really hopefully going to be much, much better. Let me know your experience in the comments below, and of course I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.